And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York, in the counterterrorism...
All right, folks, so that's parts 1 through 3 of Carl Cameron's series for Fox News shortly after the September 11th attacks. Pretty boring stuff, right? No wonder you haven't heard a word about it since, unless, of course, you are a regular reader of AntiwarRadio.com or perhaps Counterpunch. But I'd like to go ahead and welcome back to the show our regular guest, Philip Giraldi. He's a former CIA officer, is a senior contributing editor, something like that, for the American Conservative magazine and a regular contributor to AntiwarRadio.com. His column there is called Smoke and Mirrors. His new one in the American Conservative is called The Spy Who Loves Us, Israeli Espionage in America. Welcome back to the show, Phil.
How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, so we just heard parts 1 through 3 of Fox News' special on Israeli spying in America right after September 11th. And I guess, you know, it's sort of out of order from the article, but let's sort of start there with what we know about what Israeli spies were up to inside the United States of America, and particularly in relation to any knowledge they may have had about the hijackers and an imminent attack on the United States.
Well, those are a lot of questions. Let's start it with what you were talking about with Converse and Amdocs, the two Israeli companies that have been most directly implicated in involvement in U.S. security and telecommunications systems. As a former intelligence officer, I would make the point that if you really want to find out what's going on anywhere, the easiest way to do it, or the best way to do it, is to tap into somebody's communication systems and telecommunication security systems. And that's precisely one of the suspicions that Fox report laid out. Did you tell them the history of the Fox report?
Well, just a little bit, that it aired right after September 11th, and then it's been taken down from the Fox News website. You have to go to the Information Clearinghouse to find it now.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was removed in a couple days after it came out from the Fox News internet site, and then I believe a couple days later it disappeared completely, was completely expunged from their system. You know, telling you a little bit about what the sensitivity of all this was in terms of some people who didn't want this story to come out. Your other question about 9/11 is more complicated. I'm not necessarily, and my article did not necessarily maintain that Israel knew about 9/11, although there are some people that believe that to be the case. All I was suggesting was that the activities of the art students who were in the United States in large numbers, and some of these moving companies located in New Jersey specifically, and also some businesses down in Florida, where these people were living in close proximity to many of the 9/11 hijackers, it raises the suspicion that something was going on, that certainly the FBI, CIA, and everybody, the DEA, everybody who's looked into it, believes that many of these people, not necessarily all of them, many of them, were engaged in espionage activities directed against Arabs living in the United States.
And perhaps the hijackers themselves.
Perhaps the hijackers themselves, yeah.
And the point is, it's not suspicious to you. It's suspicious to the FBI agents, the CIA agents who did the investigating on this case. Yeah,
that's the point. When we set out to write this article, we didn't want to do a hatchet job on the Israelis or anything like that, because we didn't want it to be perceived as something that was biased from the start. And basically, I went out to collect all of what I thought to be reliable information coming from FBI investigations, DEA investigations, the General Accountability Office report, and information like that, which I felt would be viewed as credible witness for what the state of play was in terms of Israeli espionage in the United States.
Right, you're trying to make the larger point that there's something going on here, and it's not consistent with them being our number one welfare recipient and so-called ally in the world.
Yeah, that was my point at the end of the article, that this is not a consistent behavior. The Israelis claim they do not spy, but the evidence seems to be very heavily that they do spy, and I'm merely suggesting that anybody who receives multi-billion dollars a year from the U.S. taxpayer, and also political cover at places like the United Nations and just about everywhere else, maybe at least owes us a quid pro quo here of not spying on us.
Right. Okay, well, do me a favor, Phil. I was 10 years old at the time. I barely know a thing about it. Tell me and the audience, refresh our memory about Jonathan Pollard and the case, the giant spying case in the 1980s.
Yeah, well, Jonathan Pollard was an Israeli spy. He spied for at least 3 years for them, was receiving money. His motivation apparently was somewhat loyalty to Israel in a kind of generic way, but it was mostly money that he was interested in. And he worked for the Defense Department, and he was able to steal apparently an entire room full of highly sensitive documents, many of which related to security of communication. Again, funny, we get back to communication systems and things like this, and capabilities of satellites and the kind of information that is of top-level interest to any intelligence service. So he stole a whole room full of this type of classified information, gave it to Israel, and Seymour Hersh, among others, believes that a lot of this information wound up in Russia, where the Israelis exchanged it for Russian permission to let some Russian Jews leave the country. So this information wound up, presumably, in the hands of the United States' principal enemy. So this was not a benign activity that wound up in Israel to benefit the Israelis. It went far beyond that.
Well, now there's something that I do remember from 1986, that the Soviet Union were the bad guys and had a bunch of nuclear missiles pointed at us.
Yeah, well, that's the point. The defenders of Pollard often say, well, he really did nothing wrong. He was helping an ally. He was giving them information they needed for their defense, and so on and so forth. Well, that's nonsense. And the reason why Pollard has not been released from prison is the fact that everybody on the inside knows very well that Pollard gave them tons of information that had nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with the Middle East. And in fact, the information went on to the Russians and benefited the Russians in their confrontation with us.
All right, now, just recently, a month and a half ago or so, it came out that there was another Israeli spy, actually an American citizen who was spying for Israel, named Ben-Ami Kadish. And just from what I read in Newsweek, Phil, I think this sort of shed all brand new light on the Jonathan Pollard case back from 1986. How's that? Yeah,
it does indeed shed new light on it, because it suggests that at the time the Israelis, when Pollard was caught and Pollard was convicted, the Israelis privately agreed with the U.S. government that they had been spying and that they wouldn't do it anymore. And they basically said this was a rogue operation. Well, it turns out it wasn't a rogue operation, because there was another rogue out there. And also the National Security Agency has intercepted communications that indicate that the Israelis had yet another more senior spy whom they referred to as Mega. And there's been a lot of speculation as to who Mega is. Mega obviously is still out there.
I want to hear some speculation as to who Mega is.
I don't think I'd better do that. I know a few names that are being thrown around. I mean, even Henry Kissinger has been named as a possible Mega. But there are a couple more that are quite plausible when one thinks about it. But I'd rather not name names.
Geez. All right, well, I'm trying to remember, because I know that James Bamford has talked about or brought up an old Washington Post story from 1997 or something like that, where they talk about that whoever this guy Mega was, he was in a position where he knew not just the file numbers, but the top, even super-duper top-secret titles of intelligence reports and so forth, that he must be a very senior-level person to have this kind of intelligence clearance. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the theory, because apparently both Pollard and Kadish were directed to steal specific to request and then steal specific intelligence reports or assessments, and they had the names, they had the numbers, and these names and numbers, because the sensitivity of the reports could only have come from someone who was at the very top level of the U.S. government.
At the very top level. So this would be maybe not necessarily cabinet level, but say someone like the head of counterterrorism or something like that.
I would say, yeah, you're looking basically at maybe the one or two or three top people in something like the FBI, something like the NSA, But more likely, the evidence seems to indicate this mega was a political player. So that would actually more likely be someone's at cabinet level or somebody equivalent to that. Like, yeah, go on.
Oh, no, please, you go on.
No, I was going to say the speculation would be that I think that it's somebody maybe in the National Security Council structure, someone like that.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to get at with the counterterrorism thing. Somebody who's an executive agent, not necessarily a secretary of something, but pretty high up. And I think one of the other qualifications for this mega is that they've had this level of clearance in multiple administrations, right?